So this is Library 251 Web Usability and Interface Design. This is the second live meeting of the course. Today we have a guest speaker I'm really excited about. Today's agenda, so we've just gotten started. We've gone through technical issues and listened to our voices on the microphones. Our speaker here, Emily Sons with Sifteo. And then we'll go through the course schedule. When Emily's done, she'll talk for 45 minutes or an hour, however long is comfortable for her. And then we'll go through the schedule of the course. We're just finishing up on homework 2, talk a little bit more about homework 3, scheduling presentations for homework 3, and then the final. And then any individual work that needs to get done. So does anybody have any questions about today's agenda? And then I'll move on to introducing our speaker. Well, Emily's a very interesting person. She's a user experience specialist at Sifteo. If you haven't seen Sifteo.com, they do some really interesting little blocks, and she'll talk a lot about those. So she's been there for almost 2 years now, which is a long time in a startup. She's been doing interface design and interaction design for a number of years. She has a master's degree from Carnegie Mellon. She got her degree right up the peninsula here. They have a special program in I think it's entertainment design. And she's actually worked at the Holy Grail there, both at Newsweek and at the Sesame Workshop. And right now she leads user-driven experience research and design for new consumer electronics startup, Sifteo. Has 18 employees. Pretty interesting. You go in there. I went in there yesterday. It's the quietest place you'll see with 18 people working in one place. It's extremely quiet. Everybody over their computers. It's right up in a part of the San Francisco called the Dog Patch, which is actually one of the older parts of San Francisco. She's responsible for all beta testing and user studies. So far she has done 80+ participants to improve the product design. She creates wireframes, and hopefully she'll tell us about what are wireframes, and also she works on information architecture, flows, and personas. And we've read a little bit about personas so far. She designs graphics for the new interface system and also print materials for packaging. I didn't know that. You did packaging design as well. So she's very versatile. She's acted as the main point of contact between the company and the customers, and she's guided product design and development based on user feedback. And she also helps to work in the social networking sites. So actually my first interaction with Emily was to read a post that she had written in the forums. They have a very active community forums for people who are doing design for the Sifteo product. So people out in the community that are designing for the product. And she coordinates with the contracted marketing company. She also works with industrial design firms, warehouse distributor, and the production factory as well. So it sounds like she's got a really wide set of duties. She's here tonight to speak to us about user experience design, and specifically in a brand new interface type, a whole new school of interface. Didn't even exist 3 years ago, that she's right in the middle of. And it's a very exciting time for her, I'm sure. And it's a great honor for us to talk to her a little bit about what she does. And Emily, with that, I will go ahead and turn off my mic, and you can take it away.
Okay, thank you so much for that awesome introduction. Really appreciate it. So, like Jeremy mentioned, I do user experience at Sifteo. And it's funny that you said that the office is so quiet, because it definitely is, and it's funny because as a tech startup we are all on Skype at all times and on GChat, so we're communicating with each other just via the internet, so it's a kind of a funny office environment to be in. But yeah, so just before I start briefly, please feel free to ask questions at any time. I want this to be pretty informal and to really make sure I focus on the things that you guys are interested in hearing about. I have done user testing at bigger companies versus this scrappy startup sort of way of doing user testing. So if you have any questions in general about that, please feel free. I am going to focus more on user testing, but if you have questions about interface design, I'm happy to answer those too. So yeah. All right, so I guess I will just go ahead and get started. All right, so what are Sifteo cubes? I'm going to send you a link in the chat that will, the video that Jeremy was playing before, but that should tell you what Sifteo cubes are in brief. So does everyone sort of want to watch that video, and then when you're done, raise your hand? Is that how this works?
Yeah, so go ahead and click on that link. When you're done, raise your hand, and then we'll know that everybody's done. So it'll be quiet now as you watch your video.
Nobody has the microphone here. Emily, did you put your mic down?
I've got it. Okay, great. So I hope that that video gave you a good idea of what the Sifteo cubes are. I oftentimes have trouble describing them to people and find that video is actually the easiest way to sort of communicate what they are. So as you can see, we're developing a bunch of different games for these little cubes. And it sort of brings up interesting questions about distributed cognition, you know, how we're keeping information in the world versus in our head. And because this is a brand new product, when we were originally thinking about developing them, we wanted to see how people would react to them and use them, since that's something people aren't used to. So originally the TED Talk was given by one of our co-founders in 2009, and shortly after that they founded the company. You can watch the TED Talk at some point. I recommend it. It's a little long for this, but if you're curious to hear a little bit of the backstory and more about distributed cognition, the TED Talk is a good resource to go to. So let me go on to my next slide. Okay, so we have been doing user research at Sifteo since the very beginning of the product. When I started, my main goal was to try to bring more of the user's perspective to the development process. And this is something that a lot of companies are valuing more, especially at startups now too. So when at the beginning, we only had like one barely functional prototype. It wasn't really working. Like you can see in the picture with the girl in the top left corner, like those look nothing like how the Sifteo cubes look now. And you can see the one on the bottom, they've got like blue tape all over them. These were like barely functional. They wouldn't really see when you neighbored or respond the way they were supposed to, but we really wanted to make user testing important to us. So what we would do was go out to people's homes every 2 weeks and do field testing. And doing this kind of testing, even though things were slightly broken, is you would get to really see how people would expect to use the product. And interestingly, as you can see in these pictures, how people would interact with other people, which is something that we weren't really sure how to expect people's behavior to be. And we went to see kids as young as 2. That little girl up there is 2 years old, which is, the product, by the way, is recommended for kids 7 and up. So she's 2, and she mostly just like threw them around with her friends, but it's a good time and opportunity to do sort of explorative research to see what you think people will do. And being in their homes actually lets you learn a lot about them as people. Like you're not just looking at your observation with how they're interacting with your product, but you're also looking at like, oh, what magazines do they read? What games do they play? Do they own video games? Like getting to get a full picture of the person that by entering their very private home. That's a really good opportunity to do that. So we continue to do in-home tests every 2 weeks. And then after that, we also expanded. We also expanded to doing testing in schools. So this is a picture from a school in Oakland that we were testing at. And testing at schools is very tiring because there are just groups of kids. But it's very helpful to see how groups interact, which is a very different interaction than we had expected at first also. So we saw this behavior emerge where students would sort of each take a cube, take possession of that cube for the remainder of that session, and then use their cube when necessary to complete a puzzle as a group, but otherwise they sort of wanted to hold on to that cube. And we also saw people playing games which were intended as single-player games. So you saw the game Chroma Shuffle. It was the one with all the multicolored dots on it. So that's supposed to be a single-player game. You know, you're supposed to match the dots, clear them, but students and groups were actually playing it multiplayer, which we really hadn't expected to see. And so knowing that that kind of behavior exists, we can design more specifically for that, which is interesting. We also have done testing at the Children's Creativity Museum. So over the summer, we were at museum, which is in Yerba Buena in downtown San Francisco. And so we were testing there on a weekly basis. And we got great feedback there because it was like kids were going there to do things like, you know, make their own music videos, their claymation. It's a very tech-friendly museum. So these kids are very creative. So it was a great place for us to test our games while they were still in development and not ready to be distributed yet, so we could get feedback, understand like certain games, if there were parts that people were confused about, if we needed to make a tutorial more detailed or so, and then we'd be able to iterate, go back the next week, and have the students try out the game with the changes in them and see how that progression went. What's great about testing with kids also is they are so honest. They will tell you if something is not fun or if they just don't want to do it anymore, which is wonderful feedback and something that, you know, oftentimes we have to be careful with adults trying to be polite, but kids will just be honest. And at a museum where there's so many other things that are interesting, if the game is not good enough to hold their attention, you'll know it. So getting that kind of honest feedback is really useful. So we also do tests in our office, like Jeremy mentioned that he went to yesterday. So we follow some general things, and these are what you'll find in any usability script, sort of things that you should definitely put in your introduction. So I'm just going to go through them quickly. You should tell them what the task generally is, like what they should be prepared to do. Let them know that if this is the one time today, you really can't do anything wrong. Like anything that happens that you don't expect is our fault, not yours. That you didn't personally design it, so it's not going to hurt your feelings if they make a critique of it. And especially to think aloud, to try to express all the things that they're going through so we can get an eye into their head and understand exactly what they're considering. And then the last thing too is to mention that even if they have problems during the test, you may not be able to answer all of their questions because you want to see what they would naturally do to try to solve a problem. So after that, I'd like to ask a few relevant background questions just to get them into the mood to talk. You know, getting them to talk a little bit is always great. And then also to get information. So for example, with our product, questions that are useful are like, do you own a game system? What kind of phone do you use? What kind of websites do you like to look at? To get a better picture of who they are so you can pair that with their behavior later and see maybe certain things, if this person's really techie, then this certain thing is easy for them because they're used to that kind of thing and they've done it before. So those are just general things to include in any usability script. And that's a video that I can't play, but this is using Silverback, which is a software that will track the clicks while also recording the face. So you can see like his face there. He's definitely like what is going on. So it's pretty useful to see those two things paired together. I think this next slide, yeah. So this was a test that I was doing on a new menu system. So as you can imagine, on the cubes, it's not like a TV where you can just access a menu button, or like on a laptop too. There's not one big screen where you can click on a menu, look at all your options. On the cubes, there's very small screen real estate. So we were trying to figure out different menu systems and which one would be the most intuitive to use. So the engineers built me a few different prototypes, and I did a test on them. This is a test that was in our office. And what you can't see in the bottom right, but that was a video. I was simultaneously taking video of their face, and also I set up a camera rig on a tripod on the table so we can video record what they were doing with their hands and the cubes as well, so that we could match their face with what they were doing on the cubes. So yeah, oh yes. Here, I'll hang it.
You know, I've got a video here, a very short video that's an overview of the Silverback system. Can I go ahead and show that to sort of break up the talk? It's about a minute and a half. So if I show the URL, is that going to throw off your timing? Is that okay? Okay. So everybody, I'm going to put up a URL for a YouTube video that gives us about a minute and a half overview of the Silverback usability and video testing. Well, it's usability testing with video system. It's a recording tool that she had mentioned. So let me go ahead and put this video here, start it up, and when you're done, raise your hand. Okay, great. Sorry for the interruption. I hope that was helpful. I think one interesting thing that we've heard now, both from Emily and Sarah, who also did our user test up in San Francisco with my kids, and here on the video, is this concept of guerrilla or down and dirty usability. And you guys are a pretty well-known startup with nearly 20 developers, and you're still doing this down and dirty guerrilla sort of usability. So it makes one wonder, how big do you have to be before you're not doing low-end guerrilla usability, right?
Right. That's a good question. I'd say as a 20-person company, we're still small enough because we're not focusing only on user testing. Obviously, a lot of money has to go towards creating the physical goods that we're selling. So, for example, at Fidelity, which is a giant company, right? We had it's funny for me to think about now because it's so different here. We had 2 labs where there were one-way mirrors. So behind the mirror was a whole room with different computer setups. There were multiple cameras in the room that would be recording the person, so you could see them from different angles. And the computer itself was using infrared eye tracking. So we were able to create heat maps of what everyone was looking at, which areas were getting targeted more. You could also create videos then of seeing where their eye was going while they were looking at a page. And we used, what was the software we used? We used specific software that allowed you to tag the video at certain points to look at different things. So we'd have a moderator, obviously. Then in the back, there would be the person doing like writing up all the notes, and that would be synced to the video. So whenever anyone would go back, they could look at a specific point in that video, see what the comment was, and know what to look for. Kind of like, do you guys know usertesting.com? That might be a worthwhile site for you guys to see as well. They're really awesome because they allow you to tag a video, tag notes at certain points in videos too. So it's kind of like usertesting.com, except it was like live video of the person's face. And they would also be recording the session, and there would be the designers in a separate room right next door watching it on like a television screen. So I think user testing can scale up a lot if you wanted to, and it can become quite expensive for all of that equipment. So I think at Sifteo, we do what we can with the limited resources, since we are still a startup. But there are so many things that you can do for any cost. You know, when we were going into people's homes, it was completely free. Like, we weren't offering them anything. We were offering them the opportunity to try a cool new tech that hasn't been released yet. And now we pay people to come into the sessions and such, but it definitely can scale up. So let's see what next. Oh yeah, so what is the point of user testing? I just wanted to make this point that it's not just a way to see how people will react to a certain feature or follow a script. I think it's more deeply understanding people's behavior and really what motivates them. You know, getting to know them beyond a statistic or even a persona, and learning about who they are and making your product fulfill those needs.
Oops, we just lost her. I was about to tell her I think it looks like her connection was bad. She'll probably drop back in a couple of minutes. I think the last thing she said was it's such a good opportunity to get to talk to people. So sorry about this, Jeremy. I think it's just kind of a bit of a weak connection on her end. It's kind of affecting the audio, but she should be back in a couple of minutes. I'll give you back the mic and let you sort of hold court until that happens.
Well, I think this is a really good opportunity to talk about my experience yesterday with taking my 2 girls up. So I had signed up for the API, the developer kit for Sifteo, so you can create third-party games and resources. I signed up for that in November. And somehow I got on a survey of some kind, and I offered, well, they asked people if they had kids that would be willing to test. So I've got a 5-year-old, a 6-year-old, a 7-year-old. And they get out of school at 2:30. And so yesterday I drove them up to the city. It was quite an ordeal in the rain, and we found the offices, and I came up there and walked into the office, and I was met by Sarah, who's a coworker for Emily. And Sarah cleared out, they've got this one little conference room, and she kicked the owner of the company out of the conference room and took my youngest girl in. First I signed a non-disclosure agreement, an NDA. She took my youngest girl in, and then they played with the cubes a little bit, not too long. I think Catherine's a little bit too young at 5 or 6. And then took my older girl in, and then it was interesting the way they set it up was that she said, I will teach the child, along with the game developer, the lead developer for Sifteo is across the table, and then the child will bring you in, and then the child will tell you about the game. So I thought that was really interesting, that they were doing Think Aloud with young children. The way they were doing the Think Aloud process was to have the kids tell back what had happened to their parent. So Emily, if you can hear, I was just giving a recap of what happened yesterday.
That's great. I actually don't know much about your test, so you can continue talking about it if you have more to say.
Well, I'm a little bit fuzzy on what I can say and what I can't say. I think nothing happened unique there except the individual content of the game itself. So I won't talk about the content of the game itself other than to say that it was pretty darn similar to some of the other games there. The fellow who did test us was, I think it was Joshua Lee, who's the director of the in-game content folks. And that's actually one of the concerns, or one of the questions I had about Sifteo that has always kind of confused me a little bit, or at least kind of thrown up a flag for me, is that they really don't have much of a community of outside developers. So when you take a look at the iPhone, for instance, iOS, you know, that's a great example. Millions and millions of apps done by people outside of that environment. So I don't know whether, for me, myself, the API tools and working with Mono is too difficult. I'm not that much of a coder. So maybe it's just me, but it seems like the API tools are a little bit hard to get into. Another question is, how much audience is there actually downloading games? So if for $5 a piece, if I could sell a game, you know, the technical skills are not a concern. So I have to wonder if it's one of those two things. Because I know you guys are doing a ton of advertising, if you guys are having trouble with adoption of the API tools, or if there's not enough of a market of people actually buying the games. And I don't know, that's sort of outside of your purview, but that was one of a couple of things I wanted to discuss, at least with the class, anybody else who's used this tool. So those are my impressions of the API coming into it, because I was interested in doing some fiddling and seeing if I could get some iOS sort of style apps built.
Yeah, of course. I'm happy to talk about that. So in terms of the API, yeah, like you're saying, it is a little bit difficult because it is mono and C#, and that's a little bit
I hate to come in and interrupt like this, but I think, Emily, hopefully you can hear me. Your connection is a little bit slow, but it might be helped if you were to just take a moment and go into the audio setup wizard. And you can do that by, if you look at the top of the interface, at the top of the audio and video panel. Oh, we lost her. So when she comes back in again, Jeremy, maybe I'll set up a breakout room and take her in there and try to get her sorted out, and you can and then get her back in here and she can finish her talk at that time. How would that be?
Yeah, that sounds great. So let me go over a little bit of the process that I went through to get started in the developing process. So I bought 3 cubes for 150 bucks. It's pretty pricey. And then I was happy that they have development tools, an API, this application programming interface, I think, API to connect the Macintosh through the little port that you saw, the little transmitter, to the cubes themselves. And so if you go to that, you'll see that sifteocentral.com. That's a third-party developers wiki. And then what you need to do is download Mono. I believe it's Mono. It's another set of programming tools in order to get they have some samples, 4 or 5 samples. You can download those, and then you just start tweaking. And if you really don't know what you're doing like me, then I end up taking the samples and tweaking one small thing and then uploading it and playing with it. And it's just a matter of tweaking. I don't think I have the skills that will take me all the way to the point of where I could put something up for market for sale. But eventually that whole process will get figured out. It looks like we've got Emily here again. So Emily, Scott wanted to work with you. And go ahead and Scott, take it away and tell Emily what you want to do.
Yeah, hi Emily. I've created a breakout room when you dropped out this last time, and I'm going to send you to it, and I'm going to go there with you and sort of see if we can work out the audio problems that are happening. And I don't think it should take more than at the most 5 minutes, and then we'll rejoin the main room, and you can continue on with your speech. So I'm going to send you there right now, and then I will be right behind you. Give me a second. Okay, I'll see you in there. And here's the mic back.
So anyway, when I started developing, a lot of what you do is you'll get an error back from the system, and then copy that error, put it into Google, and then go find all the other poor jerks that have been suffering through that problem. So that's like the lowest level sort of developer process, going back to Google, because a lot of times the first 20 or 30 specific roadblocks that you run into with applications like this, people have already dealt with long ago. Another application I just learned was iBooks Author on Apple's the new ebook store for iPad. That was pretty interesting. That's a lot more mature and further developed. I mean, they've got a much larger base of people who would be using that. And that was very great. I actually put together a video on how to do that, and I will link you to that in a little bit. But basically, I got people to buy the book, give me anywhere from $1 to $3, depending on which country they were in. So far, I've sold about 70 copies of this book, and it's a kid's book about insects. I'll put the link up here in a bit. So anyway, does anybody have any questions as Emily's getting ready and kind of prepped to come back in with her technology? Does anybody have any thoughts or ideas for more that you'd like to hear from Emily as she moves forward?
Hello. I'd be interested to hear, if it's not too proprietary, I guess, some of the feedback that they got from the testing, what their response was, or how they made changes to the product. I know she talked a little bit about the kids playing with it as a group, one of the games, rather than singly, but I'd just like to know a little bit about how they took the information from the testing and applied it to their development process.
That brings up an interesting topic too, because when I talked to Emily originally, and then Sarah, who actually did the test yesterday, Sarah made a point that she was working on specifically on software and games, and Emily had a little bit more of the physical computing piece of it. So you have to know that these things, they're small. If you buy one, it's $50. Obviously, it doesn't cost them that much. But if you manufacture 1,000 of these versus 1,000,000 of these, the price difference is going to be huge. So what they've done is so the two founders came out of MIT. They got a basic kind of a form factor, an idea for what the thing should be like, tested that just probably a little bit, and then sent it off to ship. Got the money, got the funding, sent it off to China, and just printed out a ton of these things. So the form factor itself, they probably have a new version in development. I don't know, but the form factor is pretty much stuck. You're stuck with this specific device. So for instance, it doesn't have a touch screen. I don't know if you saw that. The screen itself is not sensitive. It's just a little click. So when you click the screen in, it makes a contact. So there's a single button. It's not like an iPad or an iPhone where you can move things around on the screen. It doesn't work that way. So the individual computers are pretty limited by their size and by their functionality. So I think a lot of the things they're dealing with now is trying to look at different design and interface combinations. The content of the games and the way the things work together, because they can't really touch the form factor. They can't touch the way the thing physically is. That's the next round. I think probably they'll get an idea. So this is a startup. They'll probably get an idea that they have a market of some kind, enough to get enough funders to come back in and do another round of design of the physical form factor. So another thing about this is that you got to understand too, with Moore's law, these things are going to become much more powerful very quickly. So imagine in a year or two, or probably 2 or 3 or 4 years, the entire power of your iPhone is going to be able to fit in one of these devices, and it's going to cost the same. It's going to cost 30 or 40 bucks a device. So they're actually working with a moving target in terms of capability of these things. But that's a good point. There's a video. You can watch it on your own. That's a video about how I built. It's called "Kids Love Bugs," and it was actually the first self-published book in the new iBooks format for sale. So there were some that came out for free, and there were the big publishers published theirs. This was the first self-published book for sale in the iTunes iBook store. Came out 3 or 4 days after the announcement. So I worked pretty much nonstop. It was probably about 40 hours in 5 days to get this up and running. Okay, so does anybody have another question for Emily when she comes back? Did we lose Emily?
Back, hopefully with better audio.
Okay, take it away.
Okay, great. So I think I was in the middle of answering your question. So you were asking about if maybe we didn't have a huge audience actually using the cubes. And I think that's actually very much tied towards to your first question. It's sort of a chicken and an egg problem, right? Because you need the developers to come and build out an app store like the Apple App Store. And then people will use it because there are all these apps. But developers are only going to spend the time developing if they believe that the audience is there. So, it's a hard problem. I think what we're trying to focus on right now is getting the cubes into people's hands and trying to work with a few third-party developers to make games that are great. So we have two third-party games out right now, Loop Loop by Stimulant, and then one was just released, I believe it was last week, called Miami Heist. So we're trying to help developers as much as we can, but we're also very bootstrapped here. So I think we would like to put a little bit more focus on getting some more third-party games out there, though. You bring up a really good point. So let's see, where was I? I was talking about longitudinal testing. All right, so longitudinal testing, the other things that you'll see are, oh nice, that's good, are issues that you may not have expected to see before, understanding how much people are actually using the product and where they're using the product, figuring out where they're ending games and why they're stopping to play games. These are things you're not really going to see in a user test. And for example, when we did our longitudinal test, we found out that people were having trouble buying games, and we weren't quite sure why. So we looked, and it turns out that they were trying to buy it inside the software, but you could only buy points on our website. So we added functionality so people could buy points within SiftRunner and not have to go out to the web. And actually the majority of our point purchases now are done within software and not on the web. So those are the kinds of things that you'd find out from a longitudinal test that you wouldn't necessarily see in a more isolated test in other places. So I think that actually was most of what I wanted to cover. I'm happy to answer questions now if people have questions, or talk about other things if there are other things that people want to go over.
You know, when you were out at the room, we were talking about the difference between, well, Sarah had pointed this out, that she does the content of the gaming stuff and you deal with any of the form factor issues. So obviously those two things are totally different. And I take it that you probably printed out, you know, millions of these initial run of the physical piece. What is are you planning on another physical version, or are you totally focused on software? How does that work?
What do you mean by planning on another physical version?
Well, another version of the physical piece, another version of the Sifteo cube, like, you know, iPad 2.
Yeah, you know, definitely. We're thinking about ways to improve the product. That's definitely something that goes on. It's a much longer process, as you can imagine, working on hardware, but that's definitely something that we are considering currently.
Well, I guess the testing, back to the testing between those two things is completely different. There's a video of one of your founders mocking up the size of the thing, I think. But so I would think that you're totally focused on software testing at this point.
Very much so, yeah. We've sort of accepted the form factor, like the size, when you're talking about like the size of the cubes, for example, the weight and all that stuff. We're not looking to really change that. It's more, right, like you're saying, software things that we can change, that really can change your interaction with the product and helping you realize what you can do with it. But in terms of the form factor of itself, that's less of a focus now.
Well, I'm curious how all of you think this might be useful in the library and information space, and giving some feedback to Emily now. And it's one of the carrots that I waved, that we had a group of library and information science experts here, master's students. What's your impression of this game, this interface, and how would it be useful in a library space? And I'll leave it to any of our brave students.
I would be curious. I mean, I don't know if it would be a game necessarily, but if you could tie in library instruction, maybe at the K through 5 level, or even search terms if you wanted to get that
involved in it, but I could see possibility in that.
Can you be a little bit more specific? How would you teach a K through 5 student about library concepts using this interface?
That perhaps you could start with an ambiguous search term and break it down, or even almost craft like a Boolean or some kind of search terms that might produce something. I don't know if it would have to really interact with the computer more, but you know, because there are 3 cubes or 6 cubes, putting in a combination of search terms and discovering the possibility with those.
I think, first of all, they're just really cute. I want one kind of right away. But I was thinking about in a library, if you were, you know, for example, 2 students with cubes next to each other, maybe sharing the information because they interact with each other, maybe some kind of a bump thing, and then you could send one, you know, website from one cube to the other, so you could share what you're studying or the book or the online information, just some kind of sharing between the cubes in a library. Maybe I'm not sure if that would work because they are so small. I don't know how you would be able to view them very well, but I was thinking of a sharing application.
So you'd like to see some social aspects to this?
Something like that, yeah. It just because they're so interactive with each other, I just get the idea that it could be used to share information back and forth, and maybe, yeah, maybe socially, like, here's a book that I like, transferred over to you by touching the cube, something like that.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. It sort of reminds me of a game that someone thought of, which is, they modeled it sort of after a virus, but I sort of see your social, it's all about social sharing, really. So let's say like you have a piece of information, like your favorite book or something like that, and you want to pass that information along to someone else, and eventually you would be able to see sort of a trail. If one cube has like an ID that you then can pass on to others, you can see a trail of where your favorite information, your favorite book or something, has actually traveled across all these different cubes. And to go back to the other thing, I forget who said it now, about using them for search terms, was something else that was interesting, because we were thinking, you can think of the cubes as a tool, or you can think of them as a thing themselves, and as a tool, you then can manipulate information on your computer with them. That's very true. We had in one of like a really old app, which was like a Twitter app, and it would tell you on your cube when you got a tweet. There wasn't much you could do because you're not going to want to use those cubes to type out a tweet. 140 characters on a tiny, tiny screen would be a lot, but just thinking about that as a tool, that's sort of an interesting way to go too, that we sort of moved away from, but there's still a lot of possibilities with it.
So there's a use case. There's K through 5 students in a school library who have to learn how to interact with, I mean, these all, more often than not, they have some sort of rudimentary computer system that allows students to search for things. So this is an exercise in digital literacy that could be done in groups, 2 or 3 students working together, and they could come up with a concept and then work on the term, the structure of the search, even using, like you say, Boolean terms to see if an individual item is in the catalog. So this is a physical, this is an extra piece on top of an open public access catalog in a school library. So the students have physical access to content. That's really interesting, Katie.
Yeah, I think students struggle, even as a college student, maybe even graduate students struggle with searching. So maybe something tangible, something you can hold would make it a lot easier for people.
And Emily, have you heard about any uses in library and information spaces, not just school libraries, but I mean out in public where people need to get at information and they use these physical manipulables to do it?
I actually haven't heard of them being used in any sort of library or information searching context. So this is really interesting to hear.
Okay, and then finally, some of these people they're actually working in the spaces where they could use them. How could they get a hold of them? How should they? How do we get them?
Yeah, so we have an educator's discount on our website, and you can purchase them by emailing us for an order if you're specifically going to get at least a couple. It's a discount if you're an educator, so I would recommend that. But we're also on Amazon and a few physical stores as well, but online is probably your best bet. Yeah, and I'm happy to answer any other questions. You guys can feel free to contact me. I'm Emily@Sifteo.com, and feel free to shoot any questions or comments my way.
Also, I'm wondering if anybody has access to kids and they're here locally. Well, probably about a third of us are here locally. Should they contact you guys? How do they get in the system for testing?
Yeah, so you can feel free to email me if you're interested. That would be wonderful. And then I'll send you an email that has a survey in it, and you can join our Play Lab, is what it's called. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate your time here. It's been very interesting. And sorry for the technology issues. I think we got a good presentation out of it. Also, I'm curious. This Miami heist, finally. Does it come with paper, or is this somebody has built this up? So do they sell it with the paper as well?
So the paper, there are two versions of that game. One you can do without the paper, and the other you can do with the paper. And on their website, they have printouts that you can print out yourself and make the buildings and the roads yourself. So it's a very different game. The one with the printouts is very board game. You kind of feel, I don't know if you guys play too many board games, but a lot of different rules, different ways to win. It's a much more complicated game, and the one without the board is a much simpler game, but essentially they're the same interaction. So it's a pretty cool game. It's a multiplayer game. I would recommend checking it out.
Yeah, I think this came out of the very same program that Emily graduated from, Masters in Entertainment from Carnegie Mellon University. So it looks like seeing here. Oh, that's great. Okay, well, thank you so much, and I appreciate your time. And I'll send you an email here shortly, too.
Of course. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Okay, that was great. Any feedback or debriefing after that presentation? It's a little far afield from web usability, but it's so interesting and so hot and popular right now, and especially related to the class I'll be teaching in the summer on smart objects and the Internet of Things. I see these as sort of baby steps almost. I mean, it's quite advanced, but in a sense, because of Moore's law, these things are going to become much more powerful very quickly. So the kinds of interfaces and kind of fiddling around that we're doing right now with these very small, kind of clunky things is very soon going to be quite interesting and quite useful. Okay, so here we are. Another 10 or 15 minutes here. I'll talk through the class. So you now have completed quiz number 2. I've graded some of them. I hope to grade the rest of them tomorrow. Then today we had a presenter, and your homework 2 is due on March the 22nd at noon, and then we'll go into a spring break. So let me go now to homework number 2. Here we are, just having completed quiz 2. So homework 2 is about patterns. You are going to pick a couple of the individual issues that you found. So for instance, if you saw that there was a problem with visible status, then you would use a pattern. So this homework, we're talking about patterns. Use the pattern of the progress indicator and create a post with a sketch. So you're going to be sketching patterns. People had talked about a problem using the McBeal video. Hopefully that's everybody has gotten that now. So you're going to be working from Tidwell and also Buxton as well on sketching It's another video on sketching. It's pretty straightforward. This is just a continuation of homework 1. Does anybody have any questions about homework 2? I want to point out that I want to discourage people from focusing on the aesthetics and minimalism. Aesthetics and minimalism for me is the white bread of usability. So anybody off the street can say, oh, I don't like the way that looks, you know, and that's aesthetics. So it's everybody goes to that because it's sort of obvious. I really want to have you dig a little bit deeper, go a little bit further aesthetics and past aesthetics and minimalism. Because how it looks is not really the key issue here. Okay, then homework 3, you're going to continue on with the same problems you've been working with, but instead of just sketching, you're actually going to be testing. And this includes two testers using a paper-based simulator. Paper-based simulation, so you're going to be sketching out and working with a paper prototype. And then there's don't forget this detailed description of method, which kind of lays out the entire process for you. And I believe there's a video here as well that will describe paper prototyping. So I hope you will conduct at least 2 sessions with separate users. And this turns into your final, well, I should say your presentation. Let me tell you, folks who do well on the presentation have several things in common. One, they don't read their slides. So the worst thing you can do is put up a PowerPoints filled with writing, and then just read them verbatim. That's horrible. It's boring for us to watch, and it's just not proper presentation style. The second thing is that you have not described your user well. So if I don't get a description of, Joe aged this, had this experience, well, I met them this way. So if you're sort of genericizing and glossing over your users, that's a bad thing. Another thing is if you don't have, if you're not showing a prototype, you're actually showing the thing, showing it being used, showing it getting messed up, that's great. Showing it getting ripped and coffee spilled on it, that's great. So a prototype that's in use, that's very important. So non-generic users, you're not reading your slides. You're showing a prototype that you're actually getting hands-on. That's very important for the presentation. And presentation is the only way you'll be turning in homework 3 as PowerPoint slides. Let me go here to, okay, any question on homework 3 and the presentation? No, not lots. The choices that you had made previously of those 3 systems, whichever system you're working with. So if you had been working on lots, continue working on lots. If you'd been working with San Jose Public or SLIS, continue working on that interface. Okay, so the final project is basically the whole class in a single place. So you're going to go through the whole process from evaluating an interface, designing a new interface, implementing the design and testing it. All of those happen in the final project. The final project is not shared with the rest of the class, and it's a written project with illustrations. So you'll write it out and hopefully put your illustrations directly in your Word document and turn that into a Dropbox. So this won't go into the discussion area. You need to choose your own problem. So you won't be working in lots or any of the systems that you've worked in previously. So you'll pick a new one. So if you want to work with Sifteo, that'd be a lot of fun. Or I've seen people do checkout stand. The groceries checkouts, the Safeway or the groceries checkout where you have the touch screen and you scan the devices. So somebody did a very specific, the more specific the better, a very specific problem with the interface that he found having to do with picking organics versus regular non-premium style vegetables and produce. So he found a specific problem in the interface. He went there with a camera and he photographed the interface as he was interacting with it, and then sketched out some alternates and then brought them in front of testers. It was a great project. This is a really important key concept, the iterative nature of this process. So you're not going to come to a conclusion. You're not going to come to a final state. You're going to continue iterating your designs and showing that you can always move further. Notice that she's not doing, Emily, when she talks about her testing, she's not doing a 5 or 10 hour testing projects and handing in a final report. That's not the way it works. So they get a prototype back, they test it, they make recommendations, it goes back out to the engineers do some stuff, make some innovations, comes back to the testers. See, so it's an innovative process. It's not a final thing. It's not something that just completes. Although if you're working like she was working with Fidelity or the very large financial services company, those have internal customers and they want reports and sort of the product, the final product, the research product that they get back, but that's not what we're doing. And also if you work for a consulting firm, the consulting firm would probably give a report of some kind, but we're not doing that. We're working with the vast majority of people who do user testing and iteration are doing it down here at the low end, the guerrilla stuff. Anybody have any questions about the final project? Okay, so a little bit of a short speaker tonight. Had about we had about a half hour, 45 minutes with her, and then continued to go over the course, talk about what's coming up. You finished quiz 2, and now you're working on homework 2, and I think the course is going really well. I'm reading some excellent things from you. That first set of homeworks was really, really good. Very interesting work. So, does anybody have any other questions about the course? Okay, so for everybody who's listening later, obviously we'll have a transcript and I'll put this up on YouTube in the next day or two. And then we'll have the MP3, the audio as well. So great job, and look forward to seeing your homework. And here I am reading your quizzes now. So have a good night, and thank you very much, Scott, for the extra technical work, and hopefully we'll get that ironed out in the next round.
Yeah, I think pretty much that was kind of mostly, in this case it was, actually I'm going to go ahead if you don't mind.